Welcome back to the Pauper metagame. We have some new and exciting information. Star City Games held a Pauper Classic, a real, I think it's like a 7-round tournament with a top 8 and all kinds of fancy stuff. And everything went down. The results are in, but there's something more important going on here. Again, I've mentioned this before on the channel. What we really want to see is Pauper sanctioned in Paper Magic as a quote-unquote real format. That's just going to open up all the doors because shops all over the world will start running Pauper events, and Pauper can really explode. So Pauper's already had a few waves of expansion, but the mother of all expansions is when we actually finally get sanctioned as a paper format. And this is a huge step in the right direction because we had not just a Pauper event, but the interesting thing is when we dig deeper, when we go a little bit further into the available data, we're going to see that there's some interesting stuff going on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the final standings. Let's see here. So we've got all these people, and at the bottom of the list there's 123 people that were in this Pauper event. Now, I know some of you may be thinking 123 people, that sounds like not very many people, that sounds like a lot of people. It's sort of hard to judge that in a vacuum. But if we back up a little bit and we take a look at how many people were in the Legacy Classic, so let's go to the standings there. We look down and we find 91 people. That means there were actually more Pauper players for a quote-unquote fake or not real format than for Legacy, which has a die-hard following. So that sends a pretty big message. Whatever you want to say, when you've got more entrants in the Pauper event than the Legacy event, well, I think it's time to give serious consideration to letting Pauper get sanctioned. Not only that, but I think that even if Pauper doesn't get sanctioned, if I'm Star City Games, I mean, they're in it to make money. Whatever format brings people to, to show up and play and hand over their money, and in this case, if you've got just as many or more Pauper players than Legacy players, why not start throwing some Pauper Classics onto the tour, right? I mean, this could be, floating as a little, experiment. And I think these results definitely justify considering throwing a Pauper Classic on the tour. So, my 2 cents. But you know what? Let's go a little bit further, and let's take a look at the Standard Classic. Now I know that the Standard Classic and the Modern Classic might be considered to be in competition with the Invitational, but the Invitational is an invitational. Only certain players could play in that event. Not everyone could actually participate in that. So there should still be a lot of people in the Standard Classic event, and what we find is 94 entrants. Are you ready for this? More people showed up to play Pauper than to play Standard at Star City Games big convention. I think that kind of speaks some volumes. Now, there was also what they called the Legacy Duel for Duels. Now, I don't know for sure what the schedule was. I don't know if that was scheduled at the same time as the Classic, but it's possible. I doubt it. It did have 187 players, but it was kind of a big deal. I mean, there was a whole boatload of duels up for grabs. They'd been advertising it and all this stuff. It had a huge turnout with 187 players. I'm guessing there was overlap, or I'm guessing there was not overlap on the scheduling with this and the Legacy Classic that they ran. So lastly, looking at the Modern Classic, which is always a Star City powerhouse for sure, it had 217 participants. So when you stack it all up also I guess I shouldn't skip. Some of you probably want to know how many people were in the no ban list open and maybe even the vintage. So when we look at those, the modern no ban list was was kind of crazy. It had 200 people, and the vintage was pretty amazing as well, with 124 people. So I mean, Pauper was actually getting in as a fairly legitimate format, just from the standpoint that it was competing in terms of numbers with both the standard classic and the legacy classic. So, and I mean, you got to figure there's still tons of people that don't have a Pauper deck, that haven't really even seen much play from the format, that there's a lot of people out there that don't have the exposure, aren't going to bother with it until it gets sanctioned as a real format. So if it has this level of support right now, I think those kind of numbers, you could easily see a 50% increase. I mean, it wouldn't be surprising to me that if this becomes a regular thing, to see a steady 120, 150 people showing up to play in these classic events if they add them to the Star City Games tour. So I hope Star City gives some serious consideration to doing something like that. I don't know if they will, but we can only hope. Anyway, congratulations go out to Kendra Smith. She took it down like a boss, finishing first, and she did so playing elves. What? That's right, elves. In your face, Delver. This is really interesting. First place elves, second place Delver, third place Delver, fourth place Delver, all blue red. Then we go white red monarch, mono black control sneaking into the top 8. Blue black control. This was the angler version. Abs and what's this? Tortured Existence sneaking into the top 8. And then we have another elves deck right outside the top 8. Now keep in mind, this elves deck at ninth probably had the same record as some of these other decks. It just, didn't make it on tiebreakers. There's a lot of that happens. But when you look at the rest of this top 16, we go elves, mono black, inside out, affinity, white red monarch, blue black control, and then we get a mono blue delver and a mono green aggro. So these blue red delver lists did manage to float their way to the top, but I would be curious if we could know the full lists of what everybody played, how many blue red delver lists were actually there, as far as how many of the total number of these decks converted their way to top 16. They do represent 25% of the top 16 lists, but they didn't take it down, and we do have a nice wide distribution of decks. And yeah, it looks certainly looks like a very, very fun event. I wish I could have participated in something like this, but yeah, these are all there's no real wild and crazy home brews that are coming out of this. These are all very established lists. So yeah, I think this is interesting. It's kind of fun because for the people that think that Delver decks are way too good and something needs to be banned, they've got fuel for their argument, because we do have 4 lists getting in. But for other people out there who say it's good, it's not that it's a bad deck, it's a really good deck, but it's not degenerate, it's not so good that anything needs to be banned. And with results like this, you could probably get close to comparing it to something like Humans and Modern, which it's not uncommon for Humans to have 3 or 4 lists in the top 16. But nobody, no, I don't think most reasonable commentators are overreacting to that. So this is awesome. This is great news for Pauper. Really exciting stuff. There's going to be a Channel Fireball big event, so I'll give you a little news update on that when that information comes out, just keeping you in the loop. And if you are working on some Pauper decks, get those commons and put them together. You'll be glad that you picked up the commons, especially if they're still real cheap. Snag them up now. Yeah, they might get reprinted and get a little cheaper, but if Pauper gets sanctioned in 6 months, there's going to be a whole nother wave of price spikes incoming on all this stuff while a bunch of people rush out to put together decks. So that's all I got for today. Good luck online or at your local shop, hopefully taking down tournaments, stacking up your tickets. I'll talk to you next time. Peace.